I am a 21st century female. I'm giving you a TEDx speech. I have been a student here since high school. I've made more friends who know much more about me. However, today, we're starting with another story, one of a 20th century female. She was born to a new age for women. At the age of 9, she attended primary school with the boys. At the age of 19, she decided that she would take the college application exam that would succeed her into enrolling in one of the most prestigious universities at chemistry major. At there, she would find her job being an assistant professor. She had a specialized career and was the first ever university-educated female in the family. And despite a first in a setting, there were almost the same amount of men and women in all the schools she'd been to. The world around her had evolved so radically that she found it troubling to keep up. She had been raised and educated alongside the boys for the whole of her life, and yet succeeded in surpassing almost all of them. Suddenly, she was told that she had to marry and eventually raise children. She did as she was told, as all women her similar age had already married. But she also had a job that required her to work day and night, and to not give up upon it to spend more time at home. Despite the radical environment she studied in, she blamed herself over and over for not becoming a good enough wife or mother, because there was no voice telling her that it was completely fine to focus on one's career when she is a woman. Many of you in the audience might find this story extremely outdated, but this woman, she is my grandmother. My grandmother told me a lot of stories about her time, about her family. I've always found this story extremely fascinating every time it's been told to me, because of how intelligent she is, which she really mentions. I've admired her enthusiasm in chemistry, and enthusiasm I share to be equal in history. I admired how she always been top of her surroundings. I've also bemoaned the fact that she did not continue further in chemistry because of illnesses. Apart from that, I remember the many times that she told me her regrets about marriage, due to her belief that a woman is incomplete without marriage or childbirth. But I also remember the times she held my hands and told me that I was bright. I could go on and do extraordinary things that she did not. But I always wondered, why didn't she do these things herself? Every single time, I have argued fiercely for ideas of marriage and childbirth, trying to convince her that a woman can live on her own choices and live on her own preferences. I do not quite recall the moment of awakening to feminism, but I do know that my grandmother's story has a significant impact on it. Perhaps it was simply the idea of a woman living on her own being such a rare idea, which drew me extremely close to feminism. And as I read feminism literature, and as I seen the words of Simone de Beauvoir, where she wrote, "I will never surrender my life to the will of others," I instantly aligned myself with feminism. And as I read more and more feminism literature and listened to topic lectures, I was drawn further and further away from my grandmother's view of marriage and childbirth. To the extremes, I thought that marriage were toxic abductions to cage women from free will, and that my mission was to propel any kind of indications of extension to her values. I simply could not understand how a brilliant intellectual, a university-educated student, could not see behind the basic logic that every woman had the right to pursue an ideal life, even with the absence of marriage, and should never be defined by her success in marriage and childbirth. I armed myself with repellents of her values, and marched down the path I felt was the only truth, that all women should completely devote themselves into their careers, and completely break free from domestic lives. It wasn't until I found in myself an instinct for despise for those who chose a different life, a domestic life, I would say, that I found out I have completely alienated myself from the fundamental reasons I believe in feminism, of woman and her own choices. I had become a fierce critic of the imperfect woman who was drawn towards my opposite, domestic life and childbirth. I started to ask myself, is this what I want? To go this far just to break away from other women? Despite how absurd I felt of my grandmother's values, I started looking behind her story, the story of women in her time, trying to understand her values, her choices, whether they surrender to the will of others or not. Because the text does not exist in a vacuum, and an idea does not come from nowhere. I learned that this would have been the common dictation of women living in my grandmother's time in the cities. She would have been so familiar with the phrase, "women hold up half the sky," as she was told that she could work as well as men, and that she was mandatorily enrolled in factory work of fundamental industrialization, like all people were at a suitable age and health. At there, for the first time, the value of her work was being recognized, being seen as a significant part of society, and where she might be able to find herself the consciousness and willingness to participate in industrialization. But the dream presented itself as a double-edged sword. She soon realizes that she is required to play a double role, 2 part-time jobs. Where at work she is required to work with men, compete with men, and even expected to exceed them. But when she comes home, she is so expected to do almost all the chores, all the domestic labor, eventually birth and raise children. She finds her day oddly busy and starts to shift towards the great disadvantage of work, having to care too much at home. Despite being one of the most productive workers, her family still referred to her as a good mother, good daughter, and good wife. Their thinking could not align with the significant change of her social status. It was an extremely unique historical context that she lived in, where at the early stage of industrialization, without sufficient funds and accumulation in production, the process could only be pushed forward with an enormous amount of working force. It was in this context that for the first time, half of the country's population, half the sky, women, were being given significant roles in the building of the new country, where the decisive role in pushing forward every female right is to ensure the positivity of women working in industrialization, and of course, the growth of national economics. A radical industrialization was being pushed forward urgently, for there was no time left for a transition in feudal thinking. The less urgent problem of full-time domestic labor was in no position to be dealt with, nor was there time to gradually bring women to workspaces. The necessity for this revolution is in every way agreeable, as a relatively stable economic infrastructure had to be first considered. However, it is also a firm fact that it did leave adverse effects that extended to this very day. The dilemma of Mulan was first discovered and proposed by Bulgarian French philosopher and feminist Julia Kristeva in her book about Chinese women. In traditional Chinese folktale, Mulan is this girl who substituted her father in military service. And the dilemma of Mulan simply means when a woman wants to be recognized in society, she has to hide away her gender characteristics, her female accomplishments, first herself up as a man. The dilemma of Mulan was found in my grandmother's time and extended to this very day, from the small things as female executives tending to wear short hair, as the feminine features indicated elsewise, to extremes, my late thoughts and thoughts of many people, despising women for not choosing the full-time career. I proposed for TEDx initially with the title, The Art Revolution of Women's Views of Work, where I intended to say that the final purpose of this revolution was for every single woman to be able to completely devote themselves into work. I instinctively neglected women's contributions to domestic work and unpaid labor. One cannot see the sky without seeing half the sky, half of the population, women. I cannot see the sky for not seeing every woman. In kindergarten, my teacher used to ask me to draw this picture of the sky. My sky was perfectly blue, with perfectly white clouds. I drew hundreds of boring pictures like this. But we all know, the sky is never perfectly blue, nor are the clouds perfectly white. The sky is different every moment. The sky is beautiful as it is different every moment. We humans are beautiful as we are diverse, and there is no equality liberation before diversity being seen. The dilemma of Mulan was such a dilemma because it was neglecting diversity by simply drawing a line between the sky, between the genders, and trying to fold one half of the sky onto the other half. And it did seem to be quite equal at first, because the line of division seems as if it disappears. But it does not disappear. It is simply folded, hidden, and not brought up to be talked about anymore. I used to believe that my values have been revolutionary to my grandmother's values. Unfortunately, it is not. While in history, we look at what has changed, revolutionary changes, but we also look at what has not changed. It is often what has not changed that makes revolutionary changes extremely fragile and vulnerable. Mine and my grandmother's values were two sets of extreme responses under one dilemma that has not changed. An unsustainable revolutions form to make it stay longer in history. Well, sometimes I do expect my values to be revolutionary, because there is such an enormous gap of time between me and my grandmother. But that is only an extremely short period of time in the whole of evolution. It is not that time passed, we must have progressed. It is time to confront that we have not progressed, nor truly evolved. And so, at last, I would like to say something to my grandmother. Dear grandmother, I can finally see your regrets, and I can finally live as a woman of free will, not another Mulan.